Well, welcome. If you're a parent of an up-and-coming kindergartner, a parent of a 4-year-old, you have some big choices to make, and especially one concerning the third year, about staying the third year in our classroom. A lot of parents come in with a question of why stay the third year? And I think if I had to say any one year was the most important, I would absolutely, hands down, have to say it is that third year. It is a 3-year program. When Maria Montessori developed her very first school, her very first pedagogy, she observed and she watched the children, and she wrote in her notes about planes of development. She believed that all of us were on planes of development up until the age of 24, and they were 6 years for each plane. At first they were ascending and then descending. So birth to 3 was the first 3 years of unconscious absorption. And she wrote that she wrote that from 0 to 6, the brain would absorb more than it ever would again in its entire life. And so for these 3 years, 3 to 6, is 3 last years of this unconscious absorption that happens in the classroom and in their development. She also talked about differences in their approach to learning. And so one of the greatest things she noticed was the 3 to 6-year-olds were very process driven and not product driven. They would return to works over and over again to see if they could discover what made a reaction happen. Could they reproduce the action? All of this returning to the material helps unlock the riches hidden behind each one of these didactic materials. So she also noticed there is a very inherent time of transition, and that transition happens right around the age of 6. And at this particular time, a child is transitioning and things begin to become, there is a greater ease which things can get representational. So our math, which is very concrete in this classroom, then grows more representational. Things that are process driven in our classroom become product driven in the next plane of development. But mostly she noticed a social and emotional and academic departure from that first 6 years. So finishing up this third year is really honoring a phase, a plane of development that your child is in. But not only that, it's the culmination of 2 hard years of work that all comes together in that third year. In the third year, some parents come and ask the question, my child's already been in the room for 2 years. What can I expect to see that third year? How will their work look different? What's exciting is building on these very same works, again, that offer that foundation and that support, they begin to take it even farther. So you may have a 4-year-old who has been doing short vowel spelling, word building with our movable alphabet, and then there's a lesson on a silent E, and suddenly we're building all over again words that are different. There's lessons for each individual blend, for diphthongs, and then they show up in the reading. Your child who had been just putting words on a run before to do word building now might be spelling out sentences with our movable alphabet. And then our kindergartners are given lessons on the roles that each words play. There's lessons for nouns, and there's symbols. And there's lessons for verbs and symbols. And now they're diagramming sentences as well. They're journaling. Their journaling begins phonetically, and often by the culmination of that end of the year, there's kindergartners who say, oh, I know I could spell it, but how do I spell it the right way? And suddenly there's this awareness of putting in our different vowel exceptions when writing. All of this comes with refinement and development using the very same materials they're so familiar with for those first 2 years. In the area of math, your child has grown used to 1 bead as a unit, and 10 beads strung together is a 10 bar. They may have even worked with the 45 layout to have an introduction to place value. But now that they're familiar with these materials, they can just make them sing in that third year. And so now, if a child is familiar with the numeral 2000 and can bring over 2000 cubes, 300 squares, 6 10 bars, and 1 unit, they're suddenly turning a number into 2,361. And now they're composing numbers in 4 place values. And then once they're composing numbers in 4 place values, then they're returning to things they've already mastered. Maybe your child has worked with the addition bead stairs before, but now we're adding again, only we're adding in 4 place values, or we're subtracting. If your child has been adding in the second year of the program, now we'll continue to add, but we'll add in sets. And when we add in sets, I have to give you a new terminology, and we'll call that multiplication. We move into multiplication, we move into division, and all of this is such a strengthening in those 4 operations. To feel these operations concretely, to see how set multiplication is really the adding of sets and feel it within your hand, to see that division is about winnowing equally into sets. I feel like this is a foundation like no other education you can get, like no other school is offering, because you know it with your hand. I once attended a conference that had to do with the developing brain. There was a lot of information on executive function. What I think that is so amazing about Maria Montessori's pedagogy, which is over 100 years old, is how relevant it still stays today. She continually wrote about how a child will build themselves up from these didactic materials and become the man or woman that they are able to become through these works. And it speaks to, I think, this executive function. When you can plan your day and then not only have plans how you want to execute your time, but then take action on that plan, that's the development of executive function. And it's exactly what we provide in a Montessori classroom. The day is theirs to design and theirs to take action on. All of our shelves move from simple to complex. So no matter where your child enters in that 3rd year, you know that they'll be advancing on our shelves and into these higher academics. But more than that, socially, the whole child is considered. Socially, in the classroom, they play a vastly different role than they've ever played in the 1st or 2nd year. When they came in as the 3-year-old, they were offered lessons by the older children. And then in the middle year, they were familiar with works, and maybe they could help out younger students but still receive lessons from the kindergartners. But finally, when they become the oldest in the room, they become the captains. They truly drive and pilot the entire classroom. They're responsible for giving the majority of the lessons, and in giving these lessons, truly, it allows them to master and nail down the concepts as they present addition to a 4-year-old. So they drive our classroom, they lead our classroom, but they also have the sense of becoming those masters and those leaders. And so socially, they become so very responsible. They also are developing and finalizing normalization and that inner discipline. So in the Montessori classroom, again, there isn't a sense of failure as ever being a stopping point or an obstacle. In fact, when the wheels come off the track, hopefully in the environment, we provided everything we need so that you can put them back on yourself. When there's a spill, we have towels, and so this doesn't become a problem. Instead, it just becomes data. What happens when I get to the top of the cup and keep pouring? The water overflows. Again, just data, not a point of failure. And it continues right through that 3rd year. So there's this sense of working with materials to find and to execute perfection and educate themselves through the materials. Always what Maria Montessori was driving for. There's no teacher's desk in this classroom. She didn't say the information trickles from top down. She said, no, these children will become the masters of their education if you give them the right environment. I know there's a lot of schools that provide similar units that we may do. But again, unless these units are truly in a free environment and a child can learn through their hand, I feel like the depth of the education isn't really plumbed. I had a parent come back and tell me about a really great program. They went to a summer program. Their child attended a summer program for STEM learning. And it was particularly exciting because it was about bridges, and their child really liked bridges. And it sounded great. But it also, I noted, only went for 1 week, which in a child's life is like a nanosecond. And there was one great model that they built, although I think it was built by the teachers. And there was a lot of talking about how much stress or weight it could take. And I'm sure there was a lot of fun. But without the ability to truly come to these conclusions through your movement, through your hand, through your own observations, it's like a flashcard. And while we have the ability to memorize data, in fact, that's how I approached math too. I had to just memorize my math facts. It is the weakest form of remembering. So it is the weakest form of of making lasting neural connections. The greatest form is coming to the conclusion on your own, and it serves us the longest. So that same summer, I watched another student who was a contemporary of the child who'd gone to the bridge building STEM program. I watched a different child, a contemporary, in the room. And this summer, this child was all about making a marble run. and they used the environment over and over. And each day this child came in with a new idea on how to perfect it. The marble was on a flat plane and it kept falling off. And so this child kind of put two things together in an angle to create a trough. And then this child couldn't get the marble as high as it needed to drop down. So there was building underneath. But over and over, the project was never mine. It was nothing I ever suggested. It was something that was born out of a child's curiosity, and they acted on it. But the conclusions that child arrived at, the one who created it on their own, are so much more profound than having a quick lesson on that bridges can hold weight, which is, I mean, again, it's valuable and perhaps it was fun. But it's the depth of the learning that I see here year after year that totally astounds me. Nothing happens quickly. And I think that's an important part to think about too. This third year is allowing all that they've been presented to come together. And given that time, given that ability to return to these materials, I think that they reveal the magic the materials have within it. So yeah, I'm a big champion of that third year for kindergarten. Our third year differs in the afternoon than it does in the morning. In the morning time, we're on our shelves and the 5 areas of the classrooms and advancing those works. In the afternoon, the oldest of the schools of our entire student population come together to make 1 or 2 classes, depending on how many kindergartners we have in a year. And in that kindergarten class, we'll begin off the playground, often with a lesson in Spanish. So our Spanish lesson at first is simple and it grows more complex. We begin to move into foods and jobs. And I think somewhere near the middle of the year, we're presenting all of the lunch in Spanish and offering our food in Spanish. And then our lunches are having together. This year, a year of COVID, we've had to make a lot of adjustments to keep ourselves safe. But ideally, there's 4 to a table, and our kindergartners come to lunch, and it's such a fun and festive and social time to eat, and that's always how eating should be. It should be an incredible amount of fun, and it should be social. They often serve themselves and handle their own extras. They handle their own cleanup. It becomes something that they own, the lunch hour. And then from lunch, after lunch, then we'll return to some reading, but instead in the morning when we're looking at picture books, this is an opportunity to really move into some advanced chapter books. And what's nice is whatever particular unit we're about to study, we really like to scaffold the books to go with it. So we'll do a really great large unit on our state of Illinois. And while doing it, it's a perfect time to read a biography of Abraham Lincoln. We'll move out of Illinois and we'll do a great unit on the entire region of the Midwest. And we'll talk about each one of the states that make up the Midwest. And we'll look at a state a day and what makes it the same as Illinois, what makes it fit into the Midwest region, and what makes it different or unique, what different attributes it has. When we go into the region of the Northeast, it's a perfect time to talk about the formation of the colonies and the beginning of America. We do units on a timeline of homes, a timeline of clothing. In our timelines, we cover Stone Age, ancient times, medieval, Renaissance, and modern times. We do a unit on the body, the organs, the bones, nutrition, a unit on the orchestra, the families of the orchestra, and look at different orchestra pieces. This year, of course, we didn't attend the young person's concert that Cranach puts on, but hopefully next year we'll be right back to field trips and attending them. Our kindergartners keep journals, and they're really amazing. This year, I opened up one kindergartner. He wrote, I think this was just before we worked on a timeline of homes. He wrote, a shelter is safety from, and then he illustrated a rain cloud. He illustrated wild animals. And then he also said, a place to keep, and then he put his t-shirt and his pants because he wants to keep his clothes safe. Another kindergartner wrote, there were 13 colonies. The Liberty Bell is in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is the Keystone State. So as we talk about, again, our different units, it's really fun to keep a journal as we go. and to write and to practice. Of course, all our kindergartners are always working on their literacy and their writing skills. And yeah, it's a really dynamic, it's a really fun particular point of the day. I think that, and one that the children, they come together too as a group. I think the morning time is fantastic for developing those windows of concentration, the ability to put your energy into some of these works we've talked about. And whether you work alone or with a partner or in a small group, the kindergartners, we truly come together as a group to approach a problem. And I love how their exchange with one another, how they're so interdependent on one another, but they grow from one another. The model for public school, I think, is what an odd model, and one that doesn't seem to serve us at any other time in our life. Public schools model is that if you were to share any of your knowledge or help anyone else in your community, they have a word for that. It's called cheating. Later in your life, when you work in an office, sharing your knowledge or working on a project together is called collaboration. And truly, that's what it is. And we allow our kindergartners to grow from this collaboration. And then I think one last point to touch on is a lot of parents ask, where is my child at the end of that third year and what comes after? And we're so proud of the growth of our elementary Montessori program and upper elementary program. So of course, the next plane of development is waiting. And it's exciting. I like any chance I get to stop in that environment and see where these children go. I'm very familiar with my classroom. When I step in that one, I'm just always amazed and blown away with where they take these foundations and how they begin to apply them. But even if your child was staying with us for that third year and you had the intention of eventually joining public school, I have a lot of parents concerned with how will they make the transition. And I think the greatest thing is it's different to stay in a seat or stay at a desk, but it's not one they can't overcome. Maria Montessori had a great quote, and I think it applies so well. She wrote, "The child who's become the master of his acts through long and repeated exercises is a child filled with joy and inner discipline." And I think it's this inner discipline, this ability to learn the matrix of a public school setup and top-down learning. It's not one that they won't be able to figure out from. It's that inner discipline that will serve them well. In fact, there have been some tests they've run over children who just stayed in the 3 to 6 program and gone on to public school and how they differ. Initially, the tests given, I think, were in 3rd grade, and it showed Montessori children head and shoulders over their peers, especially in math and social studies. By the time they retested them, I think it was once again in 6th grade. Much of the scores from math and even social studies had evened out, but one area where they showed that just having been in a Montessori classroom for 3 years, one area where Montessori children continued to exceed was in compassion and social connections and social development, which I think is amazing, and it just, I think it speaks so well as, I think it speaks to what we see every year in our classroom and why I chose to be a Montessori teacher. So thank you, and I know this isn't ideal for questions, but please, every one of our teachers in our Montessori school would love to answer your questions. And if you have any, just email us or write it down or stop us in the parking lot, because we'd love nothing more than to talk about our 3rd year program. Thank you.